Blast me to the Ramasus system. It's time for the Mad Merlins Warhammer 40,000 Imperium Journey. Issue 81. Full coverage. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Mad Merlins Warhammer 40,000 Imperium Journey, where we are kicking off the extended 10 issues with issue 81, and that brings us our very first Paragon Warsuit. So as you can see, I have both the frame and the completed model here. That's because I definitely picked up a few copies of this, as the Paragon Warsuits have been kind of an interesting unit for the Battle Sisters, and looking at 10th, they might be one of the stronger units you can take for the Battle Sisters. So definitely taking 3 squads of 3 alongside Morven Val in my personal Battle Sisters army. Mainly because it ended up being a little bit cheaper as well than buying that Christmas box that sold out quite a few last year, I think it was, the year before. But yeah, I missed out on that box, but luckily managed to pick up a trio of extra issues of 81, 82 and 83. So I have enough to build 3 squads of 3, as I mentioned, for my personal army. But more about the actual magazine. So before we dive into anything, don't forget to, of course, like this video if you are enjoying the content. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And why not drop a comment down below. I love having a chat with you guys about everything hobby, and it goes a long way to help the channel as well. So let's have a look at issue 81. So we'll take a look at the frame first of all, as usual. Then we'll have a look through the issue, and then we'll have a close-up look at the rather beautiful Paragon Warsuit there. So let's go vertical and take a look at that frame. So here we have our first Paragon Warsuit. Each one comes with a 50mm round base. So they're pretty chunky models, but they don't stand too much taller than the Seraphim on jump packs do, so they actually fit nicely in the trays that I'm using to store a lot of my Imperium models. But we do have a rather chock-full frame. These models are a little tricky to put together, which I will cover more when we look at the instructions, and there are quite a few options, which is always good, and it's worth taking a note of these options when you build these as your own personal collection. So on the frame we have each of the 3 ranged weapons, so a heavy bolter, multi-melter and heavy flamer, and we also have each of a power sword and a power maul. Each of the guns has a slightly different ammo container which straps onto the back of the left shoulder. We also have 2 options for shoulder mounted guns. We got storm bolters here, or else we have a set of missile racks as well. But yeah, these models go together quite nicely. Some really interesting design elements, how they stack together, which we'll cover more on as we look at the actual instructions. One of the only gripes I do have is their feet here. I think they possibly could have been molded as one piece, but they are a bit of a pain and are quite fragile, especially along this join here. But going back to the options, we do have 3 options for heads for each of the pilots, so each one will look a little different every time you build one up. So luckily, if you have 3 of the same frame like I do, you can have a different head on each. But the instructions will tell us to build them in one specific way, which we'll cover, of course, when we look at the magazine. So there's the underside, so you can see where pretty much everything attaches to. This is what I like to call the ugly side of a frame, where it's all the joins, etc. The arms and legs aren't that posable, but I reckon if you can get a mold line remover in to shave those nubs off, you might be able to get a bit more posability on the hip joints there. The shoulders have, I believe, slightly tabbed connections, so they do kind of lock into one position only. That is partly due to the shape and extent of the cable, so you're not going to be able to get much of posability from them, I'm afraid. Maybe a bit more on the melee weapon arm, as you can slide the cable up and around the shoulder, but the shoulder plate may get in the way. That's the only thing to look out for. But the only other thing I can suggest is that they should be interchangeable between each of the 3 different variants that you get. So yeah, just have a mess around. You can always, of course, dive into the magnets way of doing things. Magnetize your weapons and power packs. But yeah. So there we have our first Paragon Warsuit, and it does look rather fantastic. So let's take a look at issue 81. So here we have an issue, and we also get a fold out with this, as it's the campaign mission pack to start us off on the campaign that we played out through these next 10 issues. When it comes to the campaign, I will be doing them as a linked game series, so that I don't have to keep setting up and dismantling the battlefields as and when I need them. I can keep it set up and play through each one as I get to it. But let's dive into the magazine. So we've got paint and build articles for the Paragon Warsuit. We also have a battle record for the Paragon Warsuits, and we also start our new mission pack. So, full contents, battle record for the Paragon Warsuits. We have a short story, The Crystal Heart, build and paint guide for our Paragon Warsuits, the data sheet for the Paragon Warsuits. So if you wanted to, you could take them into battle as a single model unit. We also have the Asteroid Belt, our first campaign mission, and we have the fold-out sheet as well for it. Paragon Warsuits, Adeptus Combat Walkers. Paragon Warsuits are piloted by elite battle sisters known as Celestians. Each suit is a treasured relic, armed with finely crafted weapons and capable of wreaking terrible devastation upon the foe. A trio of Paragon Warsuits is more than a match for even the deadliest foe. So we go over the various war gear pieces that the Paragon Warsuits are equipped with, including grenade launchers, war maces, war blades, storm bolters, a multi-melter, heavy flamer, and heavy bolter there. And yes, this is how we are building the ones in the magazine. So we have this one in this issue, the multi-melter and power sword. The next issue we get the one with the mace and heavy bolter and the missile racks. And then the third one we go back to having the storm bolters on top, and we get the heavy flamer and the special relic sword, which comes on this one's frame, oddly enough. So, on the back, we can, of course, do the usual. We can name them, tick off their weapons, etc. So, yeah, I've named these the Angels of Alectia, and their strategy is to guard Adeptus leaders. And we got each individual pilot here. So, the superior is Serafina Aliana, who has the heavy flamer, warblade, and storm bolter. You can, of course, choose to give any of these models whichever war gear you choose. There's no restrictions, but the build and paint guides in each issue will tell you to paint and build a specific one. The next Paragon, which is the one we're building in this issue, is Perdita Thane, who has the Mortar-Melter, Warblade, and Storm Bolters. And rounding off the squad is Isadora Blaze, who has the Heavy Bolter, War Mace, and Grenade Launcher. So we got a little tick tracker for each time you use the facings of a miracle dice, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And we also have a record of the heroic deeds they do. So an example here is an engage and struck down a Scorpec Lord in melee combat and picked off at range by a unit of Deathlark snipers whilst holding an objective. So yeah, good and a bad one there. Moving on then, we've got a continuation to the Crystal Heart. So this is a continuation from the last issue's story. So Inquisitor Kuro Kanawa either. And his apprentice has arrived on Celeria and have found that a mining world has been taken over by a cult of excess. So in the first part, we see them arrive on the planet and have engaged in the cult and are now descending into the mine itself. So we've got a rather nice lengthy story here. We also got a little bit of background information on Acolyte Amatos. So she's 25 years old, came from Corvon 2, and is an interrogator, which is a rank of, Inquisitorial Acolyte. We also have a bit of background about the Emperor's children. Once a loyal legion of the Emperor's Space Marines, they fell to chaos during the Horus Heresy and have dedicated themselves to the god of excess, Slanesh. And then we have, of course, the continuation and even the end of the story. And it's a rather gruesome and sad end, sadly, for Acolyte Amatos here. She, despite trying her best to save her master and destroy the heretical Thane, she has succumbed, her eyes turn black, and started to show taint by chaos there. So, yeah. Poor Amatos. And then we have a little bit of a follow-up by an inquisitorial, by a Grey Knight brother captain here, who responded to the event after the Inquisitor had. So moving on, we've got the issue's build guide. So yeah, we build our Paragon Warsuit. And it does mention each one has alternate builds. So we have alternate builds for heads and weapons, which will be shown at the end of the build guide. But yeah, we show how they go together. So we build the legs first off. So glue the two halves of the feet together and then glue the top half of the thigh before gluing the leg together. We then build the crotchal region here, adding on the hip details. So we've got a bolt pistol and some ammo pouches on either side of the hip guards there. Then we glue the hips onto their sockets before we glue the tabards in place, and we start gluing down the top half of the mechanism of the Paragon Warsuit. Then we build the actual torso of it. So we sandwich the little icon there between the front and the back, glue the shoulder joints on in place, and we build up the reactor. We then put the front half of the shoulder plate and the little cockpit area on, and glue the other half of the shoulder pads over the back. Then we glue the torso and the head in place, the storm bolters, and the pilot arms. So next up, we can build our weapon. So this one, we are building the heavy bolter. So you want to glue the gun on first and then glue the multi-melter in place afterwards, just to make sure they line up correctly. Here we have the variant assembly options. So it covers the two alternate heads, the alternate weapons, in this case the missile racks, and then we got the alternate heavy weapons, so the heavy flamer or the heavy bolter. And as I believe the battle record, the data sheet does show, you can have any equipment on them, and the build guide does say you can choose to build however you want, but the build and paint guides do have a specific set equipment to each of them. And yeah, here we have the power sword arm being glued on. So we've only got a small cable, so there's not much you can get in the way of posability with these, sadly. But there we have our finished model. And moving on to the paint guide, so we're making sure we get a base coat of Abaddon Black all over. Carefully pick out all the silver trim with lead belcher, as well as the silver on the weapons, the pilot harness and controls, and the back. Then we're picking out some details of Runelord brass, so the generator on the back, the barrel of the multi-melter there. Screamer pink is used for the grip of the sword and any purity seals that might be on the model. Mornfang brown is used for the pouches along the waist and on the hip guards. Corn red for the inside of the robes, as well as any cables attached to the pilot control arms. Mephiston red is then used for the outer side of the robes before we move to Retributor armor to paint the gold icon and gold details all over the model. Then we're moving back to Corax White, so make sure you do swap your waters and get fresh water over. Yeah. And then save you mixing in any metallic flakes into your matte colours. So yeah, we're adding white to all the white details, rosary beads, the hair and the flesh, the trim on the back part of the robe. Rakoff flesh is then used for any parchment, and then we can start going on to the shade stage. So we're using non-oil to shade pretty much all of the model, with the exception of the Runelord brass and the Corax White, and the Rakoff flesh areas, as well as the actual face itself. And Grax Earth shade is brought in for any parchment areas, and Whiteland flesh shade is used for the gold, brass, and the face. And Cryptic Armor shade gloss is used to add a nice effect to the muzzle of the gun. Then we start highlighting, so we use Administratum Grey to highlight the sharper edges of the war suit itself. Stormhost Silver to highlight all our metals. Mephiston Red relayered on the outside of the loincloths before highlighted with a highlight of Wild Rider Red. Evil Sun Scarlet is used to highlight the corn red areas, such as the cables on the controls. Balor Brown is used to highlight the pouches. Pink Horror highlights your Screamer Pink details. Powdered Witch Flesh your Rakoff flesh details, as well as the face. And White Scar is used for all the white details. It even shows the eyes painted there, but I don't believe the paint guide actually covers that. No, it doesn't. But it does have a nice little tutorial on how to paint hazard stripes. I have tried to do these, but I always end up getting intermittent sizes of lines, so it looks really odd. But I've practiced with these models, and I'll definitely do a little bit better of a job on my own personal squad. So next up then we have our data sheet for the unit. So every model is equipped with a bolt pistol, heavy bolter, 2 storm bolters, warblade and frag and crack grenades. Then we have the full options here, so any number of models can have their storm bolters replaced with grenade launchers, any number can have their heavy bolter replaced with heavy flame or multi-melter, and any number can replace their warblade with a mace. We have the usual rules, so Acts of Faith, Sacred Rites, Shield of Faith. We also get the Paragon Warsuit rule, so each time an attack is allocated as a model, subtract 1 from the damage, so it helps reduce the damage coming into the Battle Sisters. And we have our keywords, of course, so Imperium, Adeptus Ministorum, Adeptus Sororitas, Order of our Martyred Lady. They are a vehicle, a core unit, a Celestian unit, and a Paragon Warsuit unit. And here we see a squad of Paragon Warsuits facing off against a force of Khorne Fleshhounds there. On the back we've got a tutorial about all the different weapons and how best to utilize them in games. So very helpful. Before we take a look at our mission, we'll take a look at the campaign pack. So, the campaign pack is much like our previous 3 packs, a little guide on how to play games and linking them into a campaign system. So, once profitable and rich resources, the world, moons, and asteroid mining bases that comprise the Ramasus system are now riven by conflict. Their populations decimated and, in some cases, utterly annihilated. Despite the death and destruction, the Imperium and their Necron foes continue to commit reinforcements to the war zone, refusing to relinquish their claims upon the system. So we have the Necron force, which will get boosted by the machinations of Illuminor Xeris and the Hexmark Destroyer. And we have, of course, the Imperium forces, which have their own reinforcements in the form of a Redemptor Dreadnought for the Ultramarines, Paragon Warsuits for the Battle Sisters, a Scutari Marshal for the Lex Mechanicus, and Inquisitor Lord Kyria Draxus has entered the fray as well. We have a nice little map here, and there's a space to tick off or write down who has won, putting either an I or an N, as it details here, to say who won each one. We also have the usual stuff, so battle sizes and mustering your armies, read briefing, determine campaign rules, place objective markers, create your battlefield, select your secondary objectives, determine attack and defender, choose deployment zones, declare reserves and reinforcements, deploy your armies, determine first turn, resolve pre-game battle abilities, begin, end, and then determine your victor. As an added piece of bonus to the campaign, we have a balance tracker. So at the start of the campaign, there's a little symbol, I think on the back cover, that you cut out and you can use to keep track of who is in position in dominance. And the effects on the particular forces will differ depending on who is in ascendancy and who is falling behind. But yeah. On the back, we have campaign rewards. So controlling locations on the campaign map grants players boons that can be used during the Ramasus campaign missions. Players can only benefit from one boon per mission. The boon is selected during the determined campaign rules step of the campaign mission sequence. So each faction has a different boon depending on the location they control. So as we'll focus on today's issue, the Asteroid Belt mission, the Imperium, if they controlled it, gain a reroll up to 3 times of hits per battle. If the Necrons control it, the Necron player may reroll 3 advance rolls per battle. Then we also have a couple of exclusive relics that characters can take. So other than Vibhuti Gilliman, Calgar, and Inquisitor Draxus, or Inquisitor Greyfax if you have the character pack. So we have a few relics here that generic characters can take. So you have the Orb of Sektet, Necron character with the Resurrection Orb. When this model uses the reanimation ability, the protocol rolls are 3+ instead of 5+. So pretty potent weapon. But yeah, like all Resurrection Orbs, can only be used once per battle. We have the Sword of St. Marcius. So if you've accidentally thrown away the back issue from issue 80, we have the sword here. So it is a Imperium character with a power sword or mastercrafted power sword. And it's a +1 strength, -3 and 3 damage power sword. So it can make the Canoness's power sword a little more potent. Then we have the Scyphosian Shroud, an Imperium character. Each time a bearer would lose a wound, roll d6 on a 5+. That wound is not lost. So very cool. Let's take a look then at the first mission, which is all about the Asteroid Belt. So yeah, it's a 50 power battle done over 2 mats, so nice and small for our first campaign battle. So we have the usual capture and control, 10 points for each of these objective conditions that we meet. Secondary ones, we have minimize losses, so an endgame objective, score 5 points at the end of the battle if any enemy units were destroyed in the first battle round, and score 3 additional points if more enemies than friendly units were destroyed in the first battle round. So it relies very heavily on making sure you can destroy stuff early on. Yeah, Sorry about the dog there. And then, of course, here we have the back page. We've got the campaign marker and how to use it. So make sure you don't throw away the back cover here. It might be very handy to keep hold of for the campaign. Next two issues then is Paragon Warsuit 2 and 3. So all what's left to do is to have a quick close-up look at that first Paragon Warsuit. So here she is. She's a little chunky in some of the lines now looking at her, but I can easily fix that up by going back over with a bit of black or other colours depending on the areas that need touching up. But yeah, really cool, fun model to build and paint. Going back now, I might leave the arms as a separate sub-assembly so I can reach all the details on the control panel as well as the cables. There was, I think, on one of the other ones a few times where I got red in places I didn't want red and ended up having to go back over and repaint it. But yeah, I really do like these models. They're quite nice and they'll look even better once I paint them up in my own personal colour scheme. So yeah, there we have it. And there's the unit for you to look at as we close off the video. So yeah, that's it for issue 81. So let me know what you thought of that issue in the comment section down below, and also let me know if you're interested in the campaign. I will play it, it's just a matter of when more rather than if, because I have quite a few other more important projects coming up, some in the near future, so stay tuned for those. But let me know, like I said, in the comment section down below. And that's it for this video, so thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you next time for more mad content. Goodbye.